Okay, gang, here we go. I'll have to deal with that piano player. He's a little late coming in on the cue there. There was a couple of seconds of, he should have been playing earlier. But anyway, here we are once again, The Link Online. I'm Mark Montgomery, and with me today are Levon Savants.
Hello.
And fresh in from hair and makeup, Terry Haig.
Thank you.
And of course, Marie-Claude Simard is with us.
Hello.
On keyboards and other electronic instruments. In the control room, looking at all the dials and things, Chantal Saint-Sauveur. And the man who follows the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy very closely, Pierre Dutil, who always has his towel with him. There you go.
The horror.
The horror.
Hurts.
Listen, I want to say hello to some new listeners we have in Nigeria, and they're listening to us on 97.5. So hello, a big shout out to you. Also, World Radio Paris and the shortwave service from Germany as well. If you're listening to us on any of those services, drop us a line to say hello. We'd like to hear from you.
So we're back on shortwave now, is what you're saying?
Well, we've been on shortwave for a while through this German service that picks us up off the internet and then broadcasts us on shortwave.
Oh, so we'll bring the radio station back.
Well, you'd think so, but we're moving to television.
We are?
Well, we're already on television somewhere.
It's not the same. It's not television.
Well, it's kind of like television.
Video of a radio show.
Video killed the radio show. There you go. Anyway, those are things we can talk about in the future. But right now, coming up on the program, Levon?
Well, a British rock legend Sting is adding his voice in support of General Motors workers who are facing layoffs in Oshawa, Ontario.
And Terry.
I'll have a story about the passing of one of Canada's greatest reporters and journalists and storyteller.
All right, and the biggest threat to the world's biggest creatures, whether they be fish, mammals, bird, or amphibian, and it's not pollution and it's not habitat destruction. So that's coming up.
Wow, what is it?
Well, stay tuned.
Okay.
You got to stick around for that. And Marie-Claude Simard, you don't have any food or drink for us.
No, but today I will remind everybody that you can now download our app.
All right,
So,
we'll have more from that a little bit
Yeah.
later on. All right, so those are some of the things coming up on this edition of The Link Online. Oh, I got to adjust the sound level on that. That piano player, I guess, was just a little bit
That
aggressive.
piano player is Oscar Peterson.
Yeah, but he was a little bit...
I don't think you should refer to him as that piano player.
Well,
Thank you, Terry.
all right.
I mean, it's...
Speaking of music, if you are a rock music fan, you probably recognize the... well, wait a minute. Here it is. Here's the voice we're going to start out with. Now, what is this? Just tell me a bit.
Well, this is, if you're a fan of Mr. Sting, you'll probably recognize Message in the Bottle.
That's from
the police days and live concert in Oshawa, Ontario.
All right. Now, what's going on there? Why was he there?
Well, it's a concert in solidarity with General Motors workers in Oshawa. You know very well that Oshawa has been building GM cars for about 100 years now.
Yeah, at least, yeah.
And unfortunately, later this year, the last car will roll out of the assembly line and the plant will be closing. But the workers in Oshawa are not giving up just without any fight. And so the union, the local union, Unifor, which is one of the biggest or the biggest private union in Canada, teamed up with Mr. Sting, who is in Canada presenting his musical called The Last Step.
The Last Ship, yeah.
The Last Ship.
Yeah.
And invited him to Oshawa to perform a concert there. And Sting obliged. I mean, and it's very interesting that the two stories are very similar. I mean, the musical is based on the life of Sting's hometown, Wellsend in England, which was a huge shipbuilding town in England and faced real hardship when the shipbuilding industry started collapsing there. And so there's a lot of parallels there. And Sting talked about this during the press conference he held later on after the concert with Jerry Dias, who's the president of the Unifor.
All right, let's hear what Sting has to say.
You know, it's a song about wanting to make a connection. and it was very important to come here and make a connection with the workers here. Because the story we're telling on the stage every night at the Princess of Wales is this story. It's a very human story, it's a very common story. And so we wanted to come here and express our solidarity and our support for their struggle. But it's quite uncanny, the parallel between what we're doing on stage every night and what we're seeing today. And look, these two look exactly like each other. They are. In fact, Jerry could play the role tonight if Joe feels.
If only I could sing.
Yeah.
It hasn't stopped him.
There we go.
Joke.
Yes, very good.
Okay. Go on then, ask me a question.
Can you break down the parallels between your experience growing up and the experience of the people here in Oshawa?
I come from a town called Wallsend on Tyneside in the northeast of England, and we only had two industries in the town. One was a coal mine and one was a shipyard. I lived within spitting distance of the shipyard, and as a young kid I would think that would be my destiny, because everyone worked in the shipyard. It was the last thing I wanted, actually. I did it my level best to escape my town, and I did. I got a scholarship to a school, and then I became a singer and made extravagant amounts of money and traveled the world and got Grammy Awards and all of that. But I realized at one point in my life that I had to really return back home and honor the community that I was spawned in, because their story hadn't been told. The yard was closed by the government in the 80s, and we were one of the most famous shipyards in the world, building some of the largest vessels ever constructed on planet Earth right at the end of my street. The work was incredibly hard and very dangerous, but those men and women were incredibly proud of the work they did, of the ships that were built there. And so I wanted to invest the play with that sense of pride, that sense of community, that sense of dignity and decency. And I hope I've done a good job. I mean, I've asked people in my town who used to work in the shipyards if I was doing the right thing, and they said, yes, lad, you've done us proud. So I hope you feel the resonance here in this town. It's the same thing. You know, you have the dignity of your work, the pride of your work, who you are. You are what you do. That's one of the lines that Francis says in the play. You know, you are what you do. You take that away, what are you?
And that was an excerpt from a press conference held by British rock star Sting in Oshawa, Ontario, and he was talking about his play, of course, The Last Ship, which is playing in Toronto.
At the Prince of Wales, what you mentioned, the Prince of Wales Theatre there, yeah. I actually, you know, I have the record, The Last Ship. It's a great record. I would love to see that musical, you know. But as he says, I mean, it's Oshawa is going through exactly the same thing as his town of Wallsend on Tyne, where, you know, the main industry closed and the town was thrown into chaos because these people, you know, for over a century, certainly in Wallsend and in Oshawa, this is what the town depended on. This is where people got their work and their livelihood, and it's suddenly gone.
Yeah, and it's not just that people who work in that industry. It's all the other industries that are supported or fed by this huge plant, and it's of course a huge story here in Canada and international as well. I think he shows the parallels that this is happening not just in Canada, but all around the world. It has been happening for a while now.
Yeah, well, the other thing, of course, that is most infuriating to the people of Oshawa is that GM plant was an award-winning plant for quality and so on of its work. And the demand for the products they are building, which are trucks mostly, is very high. And General Motors, just not that long ago, invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in upgrading that plant, and now they've decided to close it. And I just noticed the other day that they're in the United States, they're hiring another 1,000 people at one of the truck plants there to build trucks there. So you sort of could say, you know, can you imagine the frustration of the GM workers in Oshawa?
Absolutely, and you know, Canadian taxpayers who build out all this, you know, auto giants when things were, you know, suddenly going bad for them in 2008, and now, you know, just a few years later, they're packing up and leaving.
Yeah. So and of course, as Jerry Dias says, president of Unifor, they're not giving up without a fight. They want to fight this, and apparently. One of the things he said is that Canadians have sort of, generally speaking, begun to take up the fight because General Motors sales in Canada have begun to decline. So I think there's sort of a situation there where Canadians are saying, oh, you treat us this way? Well, you know, we're not buying your stuff anymore, kind of thing.
How long would it take? How long could you keep the plant at ready? Say there was a boycott of GM products in Canada, and GM says, "Whoa, maybe we better open that plant again." How long can you keep that plant going and be ready to re-up it again?
Well, the auto industry does this all the time. When they stop one product line and they create another one, they do that all the time. These plants, you know, I mean. I don't see that as an excuse when they say, "Oh, we're going to go to different types of cars." Well, you know what?
No, it was all Trump. It was GM pandering at the point where Trump was saying, "Oh, we're bringing people back." That's what that's about.
Maybe that's what it is. But then again, you get into the free trade agreement, which allows these companies to move the production to the United States or Mexico and sell back into Canada, which was not the case under the old Auto Trade Pact, what they had in the 60s, you know.
And to be fair, we have to say that GM is adding work and workers in Canada, but on the higher-end engineering side, the software, because all these cars are now running on computers and software. So Canada has that expertise, and of course they're hiring more of these engineers, but it's not in these industrial towns like Oshawa that, you know, this is the backbone of the town. So, you know, work is shifting to places like Toronto or somewhere else where the software engineers live and work.
Yeah, we saw it a few years ago in St. Thérèse, right just north of Montreal.
Yeah. Well, my goodness, that plant disappeared. I was astounded.
It's not like it's like it never existed.
Well,
when you go by there.
Yeah, we're talking about a General Motors manufacturing plant that happened,
Camaros,
which was just outside of Montreal, an enormous facility. Because I've driven by there hundreds of times, an enormous facility. They closed that down, and they started dismantling the plant. And I drove by there like a few months afterwards, and literally this giant manufacturing plant was transformed into a mountain of rusty rubble, like just like a giant pile of rusty rubble. And then it was cleared away, and now it's a big shopping mall.
So, yeah.
So
but you need people with jobs to buy at the shopping mall, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, not only that, but the idea is that you've taken away, like, a couple of thousand of good-paying manufacturing jobs, and you've replaced them with a few hundred lower-paying, insecure sales jobs, service industry jobs.
That's the game.
So that's the game. So anyway, there's certainly more to come.
Good for Sting for remembering his working-class roots. By the way, there's a great movie called Stormy Monday, at which he's in. I don't know if anybody's ever seen it. Have you ever seen it, Lee?
No.
It's really terrific. Sting is not a bad actor either. He's a pretty great all-around guy. He always has been.
All right, so there you go, Sting. More to come on the program. All right, there's a bit of Sting. All right, so what if I asked you guys, what is megafauna? No, we've had a talk, so don't worry, Claude can't answer that. What's a megafauna?
Whales.
Whales is a megafauna, yep.
Really?
Yeah.
A whale is a megafauna?
Yep.
Yeah.
A megafauna. It's Italian for megaphone.
No.
It's what it is. Megafauna are
it's Italian, eh?
that's megaphone.
Oh.
No, megafauna are the world's biggest animals in their specific kind of category. For example, there's a definition for this, by the way. Any 40 kilograms of weight for birds, amphibians, and reptiles. So if you're 40 kilograms or over, like an ostrich, that's a megafauna. Turtles as well. 100 kilograms and over for mammals and fish, like cougars, tigers, water buffalo, bluefin tuna, sharks, rays, that kind of thing. So these are the creatures, the biggest creatures in the world. They also tend to play critical roles within the ecosystem. And a new study has found that there are over 360 of these species identified as the world's megafauna that are left in the world. We've already lost a few of them, of what had been megafauna. Those that are left, most of them are threatened. And for years, of course, we've been talking about how habitat destruction and pollution are the big threats to these animals' survival. But a new study found that while these are still absolutely big concerns, the biggest threat and the most immediate threat to all these animals is hunting.
Really?
I spoke to Professor Boris Wurm of Dalhousie University in Halifax. He's the supervising author of this international study.
We were really surprised to find that, in 2019, the largest threat to these species is still hunting and fishing and direct consumption for meat and for other body parts. For the reptilians, it was mostly collection of eggs, but then for all the other classes, amphibians, mammals, birds, reptiles, and all the fishes, it was meat consumption that was the main threat to their existence. And humans have evolved as hunters, and that's our niche, so to speak. We did that all through our history, but then 5,000 years ago, of course, we invented agriculture, and that's feeding the world now. So hunting is really not feeding anyone anymore, but we're still doing it at a level which threatens a lot of these species. And the rare ones and the kind of really interesting ones, like rhinos are a well-known example, or elephants for their ivory, or sharks for their fins, or turtles for their eggs, they become even more sought after the more rare they become, and that can be a bit of a death spiral for these species.
How serious is this in the sense of what have we lost already to this point? And you mentioned how many we are sort of under threat of losing.
According to our definition, we have 362 extant megafauna, so megafauna that are still on the planet, and 9 species have gone extinct. So one example is the Steller sea cow. It's an 8-meter large kelp-eating sea cow that used to live in Alaska and it went extinct in the 1700s already. Other species are a species of antelope and species of seal in the Caribbean and so on. So the good news is most of these species are still around. They haven't gone extinct. And of those that are still around and where we have data that we can actually say what their status is, about 60% are threatened with extinction. So that's not great news. That means, 3 out of 5 could disappear within our lifetime or our children's lifetimes. But what really surprised us was we thought that maybe the destruction of habitats or climate change or pollution, all of these things that are going on and that are very much in people's minds in the media, think about plastics in the ocean, for example, that these would be major threats to these animals. And they are, but they're not the most important threat. The most important threat now and in the past still is hunting and fishing, and that really surprised us. But see, here in Canada, we hunt megafauna. Moose, for example, would be a species of megafauna, and that species, as far as we know, is doing well. But most certainly you cannot hunt species that are threatened by extinction, and almost all of them are protected on paper. But oftentimes, as I said, there is criminal interests that undermine those protections. So really we need better safeguards for those species. And we rung a bit of an alarm bell here.
Well, Professor Wurm, all the laws in the world are not going to change criminal activity. Is there something else? Is there an attitudinal change, an information thing that we should be doing, saying, look, you don't need this. This doesn't actually work in spite of claims that this particular medicine does this or that or the other thing?
Definitely. Clearly, an illegal activity will only continue as long as there is a demand and lots of money can be made. So that's an important frontier to work on, and I think we just need to step them up and work together on a global scale because this is a global problem.
And that was an excerpt of my conversation with Professor Boris Wurm of Dalhousie University in Halifax. He's the supervising author of this international study. The whole conversation is in our highlights section of the website, and it's an interesting thing. Hunting is Unfortunately, a lot of it isn't even for the meat. If you think of elephants for their ivory and rhinos for their horn and stuff, they just kill these animals just for this kind of stuff, or bears for their gallbladder and stuff, which is why I said, this medicine kind of thing, So it's kind of sad that, but as he says, that's a problem we can deal with. You talk about destruction of habitat and pollution and so on. These are big problems, and it's not easily solved. But you can try to stop this hunting, especially as he said. There's no problem with hunting moose, for example, because moose aren't threatened. But when you start, killing giraffes and rhinos and things, then every rhino that is lost, for example, is a huge, huge loss to the species. So that's something people really should think about. Do you need that? Do you have to kill that for that purpose, whatever it's rhino horn or a gallbladder or whatever?
Don't look at me.
I'm looking at you. I'm talking to you.
No, but
you're a hunter.
Yeah, but there's nothing wrong. Even Boris Worm says.
Yeah, I hunt species that are plentiful. And especially if you don't hunt them, because we have unfortunately hunted to extinction wolves and other predators in other areas. So in Canada, people run into deer and other animals like that. It's becoming a problem.
In Newfoundland, moose are a problem, for example.
Yeah. So you need humans to replace wolves at some point.
Yeah. Well, that's been said before. If you take out the predators, you have to have something to control the other thing. Whether we should be taking out the predators is another issue entirely. But even Boris Worm says hunting animals like moose, which is a megafauna because it's big, it's over 100 kilograms. He says that's not a problem because there's lots of them. And you're not going to.
And it's well regulated.
And it's well regulated. But when you start, killing a giraffe, for example, or a lion, come on, So.
But what's in someone's mind when they go and kill a giraffe? What are they thinking?
No idea. There was a American woman, who shot a giraffe last year, I think, that caused international.
Yeah, remember that? Yeah, a couple of years ago. Yeah.
And I got to agree with you. Like, what? What's the point? What are you proving? I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Get some letters on that. Maybe if people write to us with their thoughts, that'd be good. All right, Marie-Claude, let's have you for a minute and tell us a bit about this app thing.
Well,
you need the microphone on there. Then. It's the red button.
Yes, well, you can still download our app. We've been publicizing it for the last few weeks, and now starting this week, I'm looking at it right now. You can watch our show directly on our app. It's
Is
the
that
first
us?
week. Yeah, it's us.
Let me see.
Yep.
There we are.
So I turned off the sound, of course.
So I can wave.
No, well, that's it. There's like a minute delay.
So I'll see myself waving.
Yeah, it starts like a minute later on the...
So if I hold this up to the camera, there won't be feedback, right?
You can bring it closer.
Like an audio.
No, there won't be. So this is pretty exciting. So if you want to watch our show on the app, you click on the app, and then you have to go in the menu and click on programs. So there's 2 steps. It's not going to open right away on our show. But anyways, it's pretty exciting.
Okay, so that's on rcinet.ca, right? Or
no, it's not exactly. If you want to download our app, you go either on Google Play or you go on Apple Store, depending what kind of phone you have. Then you download your apps.
And of course, we're also on Facebook, right?
Yep, Facebook, YouTube for the show. Yeah,
we do it all. We're on anybody's phone, man. We've made it in showbiz.
We've made it.
That's the ambition. That's where we wanted to get. Right, Marco?
Right.
On phones.
Indeed. Okay. Well, let's go right to Terry's story because he's got the microphone right now. And so at the beginning of the story,
I paid for this microphone, Mr. Bush. Okay.
No, this is actually for us, especially in the media. This was a big story, and this is about a guy. We've mentioned this before. A loss of a great journalist and storyteller.
Yeah. Joe Schlesinger. Amazing man, had an extraordinary life. He was one of those kids that was transported from Eastern Europe to escape the Nazis and lived in Britain. He lost both his parents in the Holocaust. He wound up going to Vancouver. He wound up coming back and becoming just a formidable journalist, all without blow-dried hair, all with a funny accent, because he was good, man. He was really, really good. And so he died this week. Big loss. I spoke to Brian Stewart, who maybe more than any other reporter or journalist was responsible for bringing attention to Ethiopia in 1984 when we had the songs and people raising money and da-da-da-da-da about, and he was a colleague of Joe Schlesinger's at the CBC for years and years, and I asked Brian about Joe.
He had a great empathy towards people. I think a part of it, of course, came from the pain of his parents lost in the Holocaust, and he nearly lost himself. A remarkable escape just before the Second World War broke out. And I think that left him with a permanent rage of a kind to protect other people from abuses and bullying and the rest of it. And he took war very seriously in that sense, and revolutions very seriously as well.
Did you talk to him about this sort of thing?
Quite a bit. He didn't particularly like to talk about the Holocaust. He told me some stories about finding out his parents had been killed when he went back to Czechoslovakia after the war, and finding the family home looted and stuff like that. But more, he really tended to focus on the here and now. And he had a great global what am I trying to say here? Grasp here. He was extremely well educated. He was quite sophisticated in his knowledge. And so you could sit and talk about almost any country, any revolution, any war, anywhere, at considerable length with Joe. And he kept, a really fine-tuned sense of what was going on in the world. So he was always ready to get on another plane and fly to another story, as long as that story had a real value, either on the way it affected the world or affected certain virtues or the way it affected a humanitarian need.
But Bri, he was a force. He was a force in the sense that, first of all, I don't think any of us, when we were all working way back then, ever heard the word journalism. We were newspaper men or TV and radio guys. We didn't even know that word. I don't know.
That's a term he never used, I think.
But he was a force, Brian, in the sense that he didn't have sort of blow-dried hair. He spoke with an accent, and yet, what was it? Was it the compassion that you just mentioned that shone through, as well as that really good mind that made him such a great reporter?
Well, several things. He did have a certain elegance. That voice, that amazing accent, had that kind of European, elegant lilt to it. That's, he delivered with such a wonderful voice. His writing was extremely good. God, he could write well. I mean, you and I know it was like to sit there with an old typewriter in those days and hammer out the right line and try and get it down. And he was a master craftsman of that. I used to love reading his scripts and stuff like that. So I think it was a combination of he had that kind of serenity that goes with the kind of charisma. People noticed Joe whenever he walked into a scene, and he had that commanding voice of a mid-century intellectual warrior mixed together, and he had that great rage against inhumanity and injustice in the world. All of these things gave him a tremendous force that put him, I think, right at the very top of Canadian journalism.
Yep. And there you go. I mean, well, what can you say? I mean, it makes you proud to be a journalist when you're associated with a guy like Joe Schlesinger and Brian Stewart, I might add. You see how articulate Brian Stewart is as well. He's a great reporter.
But Schlesinger, I mean, he used to have... If you had another reporter reporting on the exact same thing as Joe Schlesinger, you would get a much better picture of what's going on with the Joe Schlesinger report.
Yeah.
He was very insightful about things, and he would get an angle that nobody else would have seen, and perhaps that's because of his experience. As you said, I mean, he had these incredible experiences, both traumatic and interesting. I mean, he reported from the war in Vietnam, for example, the Berlin Wall and this kind of thing. He also, early in his life, he had to escape again from Czechoslovakia when the communist government started to purge journalists.
In the early 1950s, I think that's when he came to Canada.
Yeah.
Was an inspirational man for me. He was the guy who inspired me to continue my career in journalism, because when I heard that accent, that Central European, Eastern European accent that he had for the rest of his life, I knew that, well, maybe there is a future in broadcasting, in journalism, for a guy with an accent in Canada.
Especially when you got a brain like you have, Savant. I'm serious. You got a brain like like Joe's.
And on that note, we'll have to say goodbye for this week here from our studio. This may be the last time we're in this studio.
Why?
Because we're moving.
Are we getting fired?
No, not yet.
Beautiful studio. A beautiful studio.
Yeah, well,
new one.
Well, that may be next week when we'll be there. Anyway, so for Lavon and Terry and Marie-Claude and Chantal and Pierre, I'm Mark Montgomery. Take care until next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.